Hello, welcome back. You are watching Insight here live on Raw 12:51 a.m. I'm your host, Ian Makungu, head of news here at Raw, and I'm here to bring you all the biggest stories of the week and hear what Warwick students think about them. But before we get into any of the big news stories today, I have to mention something, and that is Raw at 50 starts today. It's Raw's birthday, and so we're having a special celebration, a 3-day pop-up station taking over Raw, with a mixture of old alumni and current students making shows just to celebrate everything we do here at Raw. So if you're at all interested, please, I urge you, check it out. If you want to go listen to it, the link, it's all live on Raw, but the link is currently in the comment section of this show. So please go listen to Raw at 50. But now that plug is over, this is what we're going to be talking about today. So our top stories: pop producers Sav split. You may have seen on Friday an open letter was released calling out 4 SE officers who supported the pop event that took place for a couple of weeks before country went into Tier 2 lockdown. We're going to be discussing whether or not pop that event should have been held, and whether or not we thought it was being handled appropriately. We're also going to talk about the government, Boris Johnson versus Marcus Rashford. After supporting fiscal moves over the holiday, the government has now said, no, we're not going to do that again. Was this the right call? I have to say neutral. I can't imagine thinking it's the right call, but I have to say neutral on topic. And also, Coventry is now officially in Tier 2 lockdown. We're going to be discussing what the lockdown system now means for everyone across the UK, especially in Wales. We're having a firebreaker lockdown, and we've heard reports of people being unable to buy non-essential items, which for some reason includes period pads. But before we get into any of that, I want to introduce a few of my guests. Some more of the panel will be doing later, but to start us off, we have our head of training, Joshua Gray. Joshua, hello.
Hello, Enoch. How are you?
I'm good. Now, Joshua, can I ask you something? You're currently in self-isolation, correct?
Yes, nearly out.
How many times have you been in self-isolation so far?
Twice.
What is that like?
It's annoying because, well, I just want to, just get on with my uni studies and just do everything I want to do with Raw, with my studies, with my job. But because of this, it's it's almost like a stop-start with my life right now, and I just want to. I've been in for nearly 2 weeks now. I just want to get outside, really.
And also, sorry, that was it's a bit of an echo there. So Josh, I want to ask you. You work at Tesco. How does it work having a job and also constantly going self-isolation?
My boss isn't the happiest, let's just say that. But then again, there's not really too much you can do about it. I'm not going to go into Tesco and accidentally, go into Tesco with COVID or the risk of having COVID and then risk spreading it among my co-workers. There's not really much you can do about it.
Well, Josh, thanks so much for talking to us about that. We'll get into more of that later in the show. I also want to introduce Ollie Crannon-Young. Ollie, hello.
Hi, Enoch. How are you?
I'm good. Ollie, is this your first time on Insight?
No, I came on it last year. I've definitely no. I guarantee I've been on your show before. Don't worry. Maybe not as often as some others. Maybe I feel like I've been on Cam's alternative view the most. But no, rest assured, I've appeared for you before.
Well, which is your favourite then? Coming on Insight or coming on alternative view?
I couldn't possibly say, could I? I'm not going to be mean to Cam, who gave me my first opportunity on Raw. But at the same time, I don't want to be mean for you for inviting me back on. So I'm sorry. I'm just going to give a politician's answer to this question and not answer it.
Oh, Ollie, always.
Sorry, you expected me to say yours, didn't you? Then you were like, "Oh, obviously yours."
I was really hoping that you would, on my show, you at least pretend.
No, sorry, you didn't get the answer you wanted, though.
Well, someone who probably would say my show and therefore was being immediately added to the stream. Noah Keats. Noah, hello.
Hello, Enoch. You're right.
I'm good. Noah, how are you? How's your week been?
Yeah, no, fine. A bit hectic, really, because this is the first time I've joined the live stream after the show had begun. But of course, I was, I'm technically 50 minutes early. But I just had a seminar, so arrived 2 minutes in. But it's all fine. The most hectic part of my day has been trying to sort out the lighting, because if you remember on last week's Insight, obviously it was at 5 p.m. So the where I was sat, it was all very dark. But now it's sort of at midday. And now it's too sunny, so I've had to shut my curtains. So it's, these first world problems of trying to sort the lighting for the viewers. But other than that, it's been a relatively stable-ish week. I am in self-isolation. But,
aren't we all?
Yeah, only until Thursday, though. It's a relief.
I didn't realize. So were you in self-isolation last week when I
Well, interestingly, I got the email on Friday evening, and they just said I had to do it until this Thursday because I've been in a seminar with someone else, other people that have tested positive. But I think it's not a long period because we were all wearing masks. We were all sat, 2 meters apart, exam style. As a hence the length of, I'm not showing any symptoms, so the length of our isolation is actually too long. It's only one seminar that I would have had in person that has been moved online. So actually, compared to how sort of drastic it could have been, I've been very lucky.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I sort of want to ask a question then. Do you think the university's system for test and trace is working, where you can get an email saying you came into contact with someone just over a week ago who has coronavirus?
Yeah.
So down now, you'll be out in a couple of days. Do you think that works?
I don't know what the sort of logistical, challenge is. Clearly, the people that had it in my seminar would have had to tell the test and trace people. I don't know the length between them telling test and trace emailing me, but the email itself was very clear. Just saying that I had to sort of self-isolate, explaining what it is, explaining that there is this phone line available for Warwick students during the week for people that are finding self-isolation tricky. But I'm very lucky. I'm missing my jogging, strangely, which is a strange thing to say. But I've got my backyard, and actually compared to what it could be like, got lots of food. So actually, I'm sort of well stocked up and plenty to be getting on with uni wise and other bits and bobs too. So it's very lucky compared to other people.
Yeah. I guess so I want to ask then, Ollie, have you self-isolated before?
Right, well, it's a bit complicated. We've had like a few scares in our house whereby someone's got like a cough, but then we thought, well, you haven't been out the house, so I feel like we're okay. So every kind of few weeks, I feel like it's the third time someone's just they've just had a cough, and we thought, well, to be fair, that isn't a mass, we feel like you need a substantial, recurring cough. So we've always had these kind of mini kind of scares, but last week, one of my flatmates, Megan, got an email like Noah to say that she'd been in a seminar with somebody who obviously had coronavirus and had tested positive, and then since then she's developed a cough. So this was last Friday, and now since then she hasn't developed any more symptoms, and no one else in the house has got any. And I just think, I'm hoping for the best, because I just think, what are the chances of everyone else in the house being asymptomatic? I mean, I don't know how likely that is. So I mean, she did a test. It was a home test. It came over the weekend. Hopefully we'll get the results either tomorrow or Wednesday. So I mean, it hasn't been, if it's negative, it hasn't been massively disruptive for me. I'll have only missed 2 seminars and 2 shifts at work, but I mean, it just seems like Josh was saying before about how it's like a recurring thing every so often. You feel like you're fine, and then a week later something else happens, and it's just because I live with 6 other people, the likelihood of someone getting a symptom is far higher than, say, who lives with far less people. So it's a worrying time, and the biggest problem about it is once this goes, whether she tests negative and we carry on, or she tests positive and therefore we have to isolate for another week, it's just there's no guarantee that in the future, that'll be it. It could happen again in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. That's the worst thing about it. It feels like it's never ending.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk a lot more about that in a few minutes when we get on to commentary in Tier 2. But first, I want to start our talking. I want to say, before we get into any of these big stories today, I want to say happy birthday to someone. Now we have a few more viewers here. Happy birthday to Raw. It's Raw at 15 this week. Starting at 1 p.m., Raw is live with a series of shows from alumni, big names alumni like Stephen Merchant, and some more recent presenters, bringing you a wonderful celebration of 50 years of Raw. So please do tune in at radio.warwick.ac.uk. But first, before we get into anything else, let's first story. Pop producers SAB split. Now, some of you may have seen this headline released 2 days ago from the DD officer at Warwick SU. Warwick SU holds club night in the middle of global pandemic. And that's certainly a striking title. But what it goes on to allege is that the pop social Warwick has been holding for the past couple of weeks, which is very popular with society execs. That social, which we were promised was COVID secure, it was not COVID secure. It was totally unsafe, only supported by a minority of the SAB officer team. So I want to come to all of you first. Do you think it was right to hold pop in the middle of a pandemic? Saying pop makes it sound right. Do you think it was right to hold, for the SU to hold any kind of social in the middle of a pandemic? No, I'll come to you first.
Well, I'll start by saying happy birthday to Raw. I remember Insight Initiative was meant to be at 1 p.m. today. So when I was doing my promotional, I was going to do a promotional tweet on Twitter saying, what do you choose, listening to Retro Raw or listening to Insight Live? So it's good it's been moved to midday so that listeners don't have that dilemma and they can enjoy both in equal measure. As for Pop, I've never been to Pop. I've got no intention of ever going. So I think I can speak about it with some degree of objectivity. Clearly, holding some party in the middle of a pandemic isn't exactly the wisest decision, not least as part of campus is in Coventry, which is now under the Tier 2 restrictions. I don't know when precisely this event was held, but I remember reading an article about it on the Ball, which seemed to suggest it would be sort of groups of 6, quite socially distanced. But ultimately, when the SU have got to come to a decision about whether they allowed it or not, and I think having a split within the main sabbatical officers just isn't right. Obviously, a students' union is very different to the cabinet of the UK, but I'd say both are based around the idea of collective responsibility. You might have a vote, you have to come to a decision, and then you all have to agree to stand by that decision and advocate it. And if you can't do that, then you have to resign.
No, that's interesting. Ollie, do you agree with what Noah's saying there?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's really foolish to organise some kind of social in the middle of a pandemic, because it's not even like no, I've not been to Pop, but I think it's something that we can postpone into the future. It's not like it's a necessity at the moment, and I would agree. I don't really feel like there should be a split within the SU over it. They should make a collective decision and then go through with it. But yeah, I was reading about this last night, and I just shake my head in disbelief at how just silly the behaviour has been.
We had a comment in from Jacob. With the quote-unquote SAB split, do the panel foresee further division of the SU? Is this the beginning of the end? That's a very extreme question, Jacob, which we'll get into in a second. But first, I want to introduce our final guest for today's show. Imogen, welcome to the stream.
Hiya.
Look, Imogen, we were discussing how everyone has been self-isolating. You've been self-isolating as well, I believe, very recently. When did you get out?
Friday.
Right.
Yeah, this weekend's been very good.
So, how have you been celebrating being out of self-isolation?
So we went into Leamington on Friday evening with a few of my friends, which was quite nice, just to go to a pub. I mean, obviously it was done by 10, but it was still nice just to go out and about, and then just enjoying walking outside if you want to, or just going to the shops to get something if you need to. Just that kind of freedom.
I can only, honestly,
Yeah.
I remember when I got out, it was so relieving. Imogen, I want to ask you, what do you think about the SU holding a social in the middle of a pandemic? Especially especially as first year on campus.
I was going to say, obviously, I've heard so much about Pop and circling and just the whole university experiences, and I couldn't wait to experience it when I got to uni and to be able to try these new events and meet new people. But I'm gonna have to take the stance that it just wasn't not very responsible to have that going on right now. And as much as I would love to experience it and kind of understand what it's like, I think just for the safety of everyone, especially given the past few weeks and how they've gone, even without any kind of university-led social interactions and how many cases that's produced. I don't know how that's going to get any better if universities start having these big events, even with COVID secure measures. So yeah, I think that although it would have been amazing to experience it for the first time and see what it's like, I don't mind waiting for the safety of everyone else just to not get COVID.
Yeah. But I want to always kind of push to everyone, so I think you're all fairly agreeing that this was a bad idea. We've sort of seen, especially now since everything's been closed out at 10 o'clock, a new rise of people having in their dorm raids, people breaking lockdown rules to go across houses, across accommodation. Surely it might be better then for the SU and university to find a safe alternative for socialization rather than sort of these unregulated parties. Josh, I'll come to you.
Well, I mean, you do raise a very good point there in that, I mean, if there's no official event, you're just going to have students then doing their own versions of these sorts of pop-like events where they're definitely not, where in many cases they're probably not going to enforce social distancing. But at the same time, the SU is meant to be putting forward, it's almost like an agreement with what the government is meant to be doing to show us a form of responsibility, and putting in no matter how many times they could say it's COVID secure, I mean, I've heard many cases where this was simply not the case, where the COVID secure measures were simply not adhered to, especially in quite an enclosed space. And also then seeing this split with the, especially since we said the open letter from the DDO, also mentioning four SAB officers of the SU, seeing a large split, it does bring up again into what Noah said about collective responsibility, especially since, you are still part of that SU team that still put that through. You are therefore by association, you are then also guilty.
Okay, let's talk about that. So the letter was released on Friday by a DD officer. Do you think it was appropriate for them to publicly say, "Hi, everyone, this is an argument we're having internally"? Ollie, I'll come to you.
I feel like it's important to be transparent, isn't it? So I feel like the fact that they have demonstrated that this is an argument, well, this is a disagreement in the SU, I feel like it's good, because had they not done that, then we probably would all be saying, well, it's how outrageous is it that the SU are having this kind of disagreement and no one knows about it. But then at the same time, I feel like there still needs to be that aspect of like that they all kind of agree and collectively move forward with the same agenda. So I feel like I'm glad that it's been published, because I think it's important that things are transparent. So in my opinion, then I would say yes.
Especially, no, I'll come to you. Especially the SU. It's also odd to see SU campaigning for both POP and online learning as earlier this year. I mean, how do we reconcile these two decisions? No, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I mean, it is slightly contradictory, but then I again sort of compare it again to the cabinet, and if there's an internal disagreement in the cabinet, you wouldn't have one cabinet member publishing an open letter voicing their disagreement. They might leak something to a newspaper, so you might have someone from the SU leaking something to the BOR or RAW, but you wouldn't have an open letter. So I think it is, very strange. I don't know whether such an action has been taken in the past. And as for Jacob's question about it being the end of the SU, I think that probably is a bit of an exaggeration. I think throughout its entire existence, there's always been, internal student disagreement. That's just part of the course of life. And indeed, one of the things about university is learning to cope with those, disagreements and differences of opinion. But I think it is something that it's brilliant to have that debate within the sabbatical officers team. But once a final decision is made, then I think everyone has to stick by it. Otherwise, it just reduces the sort of integrity and stability of the students' union as a whole.
Yeah. I want to come to you, Imogen, as someone who's not experienced, someone who's obviously new to university, absolutely no idea about SU politics. What's your take on this whole SU split conversation?
It's a bit interesting because I don't really understand like the politics behind the SU and like how it all works in terms of disagreements actually like within the people that are working in the SU. But like I think that it's quite interesting, like as you said, like they've had quite a varied opinion on the pandemic this past month. So they're like, no, we want all online learning, freshers events are basically all virtual. They're like no in-person freshers events. Tried to put on like a virtual club night, that didn't work, and now they're saying to come and do POP like in person. And I think just that kind of I'm not really sure where they're standing on this or what kind of message they're producing. And so by producing this letter basically saying they are disagreeing about these things, it just makes it even more confusing for like the average person to understand what their stance is and what they're going to be pushing for as an SU, because I'm confused as to what their exact like path of what they're going to be doing in the future in terms of being like COVID complicit, because they seem to have such differing views and it just changes from one week to the next about what they actually want to do in terms of social events.
Yeah. Now, Josh, I want to come to you and ask you something. Do you think X1 mentioned that the end of the SC, and that seems very, sort of far away, very distant. But do you think over the last year, with initially the backlash to online learning being unconsulted, now we're going to see a dramatic loss of faith in the SU?
I think especially this really comes to the question of what faith we leave in the SU from this, as you pointed out in the question. Like, will there be almost like a loss of legitimacy in the SU from this split? I think what we need to also take into account is that the SU is not going to work in the same way as we've been mentioning, like cabinets or parliament would work. I mean, we're not representing any parties here. There's no real unity. They've all had their own campaigns to join the SU, so they've all coming in from different backgrounds and different viewpoints. So I think clashes are always going to happen. This is just one of the very few cases where it's very much been publicised that these splits are happening. I think in every vote they have, there will be a split every time. So, as I said, this is the only time where it's going to be a public split. But it's on such a major issue, especially with the current events. This is something where you need a more united front on something as serious as coronavirus, especially with Coventry being in tier 2, where we have many students who are living in Coventry. And then we also have the campus itself, which has had many students in their own version of having their own lockdown. Lots of accommodations have been in like block-wide lockdowns. So I think, as we said, I think it was a terrible decision to put this in, because it shows a contradictory idea. And I think in general that could also, for first years, second years, third years, masters, postgraduates, I think this would also put in the minds of, because it was such a public disagreement, I think this in some cases probably will cause almost like a reduced faith in the SU standing for the student safety and what the students want.
Yeah. Now, something else that we've seen in response to this letter, in fact, some people argue the letter is part of, is the culture of harassment. Acusia, the police who put that letter out, has received harassment for putting it out. And also, we've seen over the past few weeks, yes, received a huge amount of harassment over the online learning campaign. And some people say the letter itself is an open attempt to get the people who endorse POP to be harassed. Do we think that in SU politics and student politics is a culture of harassment? Ollie, I'll come to you. I know you're very big in the student politics world.
Well, you say that, but to be fair, I have to confess that SU politics doesn't excite me as much as people think it would. In terms of harassment, I feel like it's inevitable, isn't it? That there's going to be, and this isn't just exclusively a Warwick issue, but within the SU, there is going to be people who get elected that often disagree, and therefore there might be a culture of bullying involved. But I'm not sure about harassment. To be honest, I'm giving a really weak answer here, because the SU I just really don't get engrossed in it like a lot of politics, and particularly pay students do. But I mean, potentially, I'm not so sure. I mean, you would have to look at individual cases, wouldn't you, and like the behaviour between individuals, and then determine from that whether it's harassment. But I mean, there's no doubt that it could potentially exist, of course.
Yeah. Well, Noah, I'll ask you the same question then.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure. I don't know the internal goings on of what happens within the SU, and of course, I won't want to end up libeling anyone. But I think we have to distinguish between accountability and harassment. Obviously, there will be disagreements between sabbatical officers. As you said, they're not running as one party; they are as individuals. There will be differences of opinion, and it's fine to debate, argue, disagree, have that discussion well, and that's what should be part of any sort of democracy. So that should be fine. But harassment and bullying is completely unacceptable. Aware that if that does exist, then there sort of needs to be some independent process through which a resolution can be reached. But as I said, I don't know what actually goes on in the specific circumstances. As for the SU representing students, I think it is important to remember that sadly the turnout, even for the main sort of student votes in February, the turnout is often very low. So actually students maybe already think that the SU doesn't represent them because so few sadly vote in those all-important elections.
Yeah. I guess one last question, this for you, Imogen. Has this entire incident encouraged you to get more involved in the SU, or has it pushed you further away?
It's kind of like just shown me how like political it is, and it's like arguments and like disagreeing, and just confusing, to be fair. Like as a first year coming in and kind of wanting to know what exactly the main message is, like from the SU and representing students. Like obviously before I came, I heard about this campaign to get everything online, and then everyone was saying that doesn't represent the students' interest. And then like as it goes on, like week by week, I'm just really confused as to where the SU stands in terms of actually representing the students and what actually they're doing as a body. And so I think definitely for me, and probably for a lot of first years, we are really wondering what exactly the SU is meant to be doing, and whether they actually are representing our views and our health concerns, really.
Yeah. I'm going to ask everyone here this panel a quick question. Did you vote in the autumn elections that just passed last week? That's a no from Josh, no from Ollie, yes from Noah.
I did, yeah.
Was that a no from Imogen, or was it like a
I voted for a few positions, but not all of them.
Well, doesn't that just...
I'd be so angry at myself in normal life.
That didn't really just sums everything up about SU politics. Moving on from SU politics to actual politics, Boris Johnson versus Marcus Rashford. So after the Marcus Rashford, a very successful campaign this summer to get Boris Johnson to give in and provide free school meals over the summer holiday, The Prime Minister took a harder line last week and said they would not be extending it over either half term or the Christmas holiday. After Labour put an opposition day motion in to get the government to put an official motion out, it was widely rejected by Conservative MPs and therefore lost. I mean, the government will not be providing free school meals this week. Panel, I just want to come to you for initial reactions. Josh, I'll start with you.
Well, I mean, I've been seeing it going round from the votes that came through. They pointed out a certain member of parliament who voted against the free school meal extension, and that was the children's minister. She voted against giving free school meals to students. Now, I don't think I need to say anything more than that. That just says it, really.
Ollie?
I think the government again has found themselves in another hole, and they really need to stop digging. That's my initial reaction.
Noah?
Well, my initial reaction was I know nothing about football and care for it even less, so I only know Marcus Rashford as a political campaigner. He has probably been the most successful political campaigner maybe of the last 5 to 10 years.
And Imogen?
I think it's just basically confusion as to how the government is getting away with this and how they're literally publicly saying these statements and just saying no to free school meals, and how that's just like, yes, that's fine. Obviously, there's opposition, but in terms of like the government, they seem to be able to justify their case.
Well, I mean, the government's big argument so far seems to be that they can no longer afford free school meals. After a year of big spending on, anti-COVID requirements, on furlough, that sort of thing, they're now saying free school meals are out of their funding budget. Now, Ollie, you immediately made a face there, so I'm going to come straight to you.
I just think, compared to what the government have spent over the last 6 months, the money that is required for the free school meals to be extended is a drop in the ocean. And I think, above all, it makes the government look really callous. I mean, I see the argument from a lot of Tory MPs is, we need a long-term strategy. And what you can acknowledge that, but also recognise that in a pandemic, a priority should be making sure that our children are fed. So there's no one's disputing that we don't need a long-term strategy for for this. But you can also, you can recognise that, in the here and now, we need an immediate solution. A short-term thing is necessary. So we should do this. And I feel like I think it's a massive miscalculation politically, because I don't think people are going to, we all live in a political bubble, so towards it's a massive thing, but I actually feel like this is cutting through with a lot of the general public as well. There's a petition that's on the Parliament website, and I know that they're not always massively successful, but I think the last time I checked, it was a petition to extend free school meals, and it had reached nearly 900,000 signatures. So I feel like this is really cutting through, and I think the other thing I'll just say is that in the early 70s, when Thatcher reversed free school milk for children, she later regretted it because it was considered a drop in the ocean economically, and it made the government look quite cruel. I think the exact same thing has happened here. So I just feel like we are potentially waiting for another U-turn. And the fact that the government had to be encouraged into doing it the first time over the summer, and now they're going to be potentially be forced into it again. So I just think it makes it look heartless. And I don't know who in Downing Street thought that this voting against this would, regardless of their own opinion on it, I feel like the opinion is, to me, it's very obvious anyway, but I just think, the political costs of it are massive, and I don't see how nobody saw it coming.
No, I'll come to you in this. What do you think? Is this a sound financial idea, or just making the government look heartless over nothing?
Yeah, I think the economic arguments against extending free school meals are just sort of ludicrous. The actual amount, if you look at it, in the whole scheme of government spending, it is just pittance, especially when you consider how much they've been paying test and trace companies per day, thousands of pounds. Secondly, of course, the UK national debt and international debt is huge, but actually interest rates are at an all-time low. So if there's any time to borrow to ensure that people are adequately fed over half-term and the Christmas holidays, that time is now. I think people are accepting the debt will be repaid over generations, just like after the Second World War. And thirdly, as Marcus Rashford himself said, providing extra money for free school meals is not a loan, it's an investment, because if children are well fed and adequately got all the sort of nutrients they need, they're going to be more attentive, they're going to pay more attention in class, they're going to concentrate, and so that probably means in the long term they're likely to do better academically and probably get higher paid jobs in which they'll probably repay the taxes that would have been spent on providing the free school meals. So actually it's an investment, not a loan. So the economic case against it is sort of non-existent, and the moral case against it is just, as we've said, really heartless.
Yeah. Imogen, as someone who's already felt the blow of the government with your A-levels this year. What do you think about this latest decision?
I think I have to like completely agree with Ollie. I'm like, I don't understand the economics behind this, but I don't understand why they couldn't fork out the money for literally a week, but they were able to do it in summer for multiple weeks. And there was never any kind of worry raised as to, oh, we didn't have enough money to do this. Johnson was like, oh, I only just heard about it. That's why I'm only responding to it now. But I just, it's like a week. And it could have such a massive impact, like both politically in terms of the standing for the Conservative Party, and then also like just mentally and physically on the well-being of those children. And I just don't think that's a strong enough like there isn't, using economics as an argument against this is not a strong enough argument for those two potential gains. And I just can't understand why they did what they did, even regardless of whether they could lose some money in terms of the economics.
Yeah, well, I think the government's real big argument is that while they can pay how to pay for 1 week and maybe over Christmas, if they start doing it now, they'll never stop doing it. And I believe the phrase "nationalising children" was mentioned, which is I'll talk about it in itself. Josh, I want you to have the final word in this economic argument. Do you think it stands up?
No, not at all. I mean, consider the fact that earlier this month, MPs were debating and were very supportive of giving themselves a £3,000 pay rise, and yet they say that this is an economic issue. I'm sorry, it is clear hypocrisy from the Tory government, and it just shows again that the Tories, most of them don't actually understand the plight of the average British citizen, in that there are a lot of children, a lot of families who in their minds every day are thinking, when am I going to eat my next meal? And something like this is actually important for so many people across this country. And I'm sorry that Boris Johnson doesn't understand that plight after he went to Eton and Oxford, but he needs to understand that he's in the minority here, and he needs to understand that, yes, okay, it will cost money, but it's worth it.
Yeah. And Ollie, did I see you murmuring something there, or do you want to?
No, I was just.
You just fully agree.
I was agreeing kind of tentatively. Yeah, it's just.
Okay. Well, we've seen in the backlash to this whole story. We've seen some truly extraordinary arguments mentioned. I mentioned the nationalising children argument earlier. But one particular story that got picked up quite broadly was Ben Bradshaw, who argued that the source.
Ben Bradley. Sorry.
Ben Bradley.
Ben Bradshaw.
Ben Bradshaw. I'm angry at too many people now. I'm losing track of who. Ben Bradley, who argued that the schools he'd spoken to, in fact, he invited Miles Bradford to come speak in a school, were against free school meals. Even though the school he's claimed to be speaking on behalf of, they put out a statement underneath his own tweet saying, actually, that's untrue. He also claimed that people would trade free school meals for drugs in his local area. I probably should have a question, but first I just want a pure reaction. No, I'll come to you first. What do you think?
I mean, it is sort of the height of irony, really. If you think how well the Conservatives did last year, it was among working class voters, and so you win their votes perhaps for the first time in the history of all their lives voting, and then you suddenly accuse them all of basically being drug dealers. It's very patronising, very anti-working class, and sort of really a way to lose sort of my vote or anyone else's vote. I thought it was just a shambles, really, and shows that political debate is never best conducted on Twitter. It looked like a parody from Private Eye. It didn't look like something that a Tory MP had actually written until you realise it was no parody and it had actually been written. It was remarkable, really.
Imogen, what do you think? What do you think about Ben Bradshaw's comment?
I think the main thing that I wanted to kind of like latch onto here is the fact that, a couple months ago, the government was so intent on creating a campaign to stop obesity and encourage healthy eating. And I think that that's just so like hypocritical. And these two campaigns are just like completely like, they just don't work together, because you're literally offering these kids and the ability to have like a full nutritious meal where like covering all the food groups and like really good for their health. Or you're saying, leaving it to the parents to be buying them like, like fast food or kind of like ready meals, because if they're going to be stuck with a decision to either buy their kid like a ready meal or forking out loads of time and money on like research into all these different like food groups and then what meal to make them, they're going to obviously go with the ready meal. And those two campaigns are just not really aligning for me when they had the opportunity to be able to provide kids like at this young age a proper like nutritious healthy meal that will also then teach them what a nutritious healthy meal is. That's gonna like this, they're gonna like work in tandem if you ensure that these kids are properly well fed. And that's just like kind of the main contradiction that's just really annoying me.
Yeah. And Josh, just give me a pure reaction to Ben Bradley.
Ben Bradley accusing his own constituents of being drug addicts and drug dealers is all we really need to say here. To say that the Tory government and Tory MPs are completely out of touch with the actual plight of the general population.
Yeah. I mean, look, that does bring me into a question. Also, I think Noah touched upon it. The Tory government did win the Red Wall off Labour last year, and they now believe they had a new connection with the working class. They now understood them. Ollie, what's happened?
Well, what I would say about the Red Wall voters is that the Tory government need to be very careful, because I feel like a lot of the doors I knocked on in December, people were reluctantly voting Tory, and it was almost a case of, if it was reluctant that time, but if the Tories do deliver it in those Red Wall seats, then it won't be reluctant next time, that they'll willingly vote Tory. But so far, I really don't think the Tories have handled it very well. I mean, obviously Labour needs to change, and I hope that they will, but I mean, as it stands, I really don't feel like they're treating those. I think they're treating them with contempt, I have to say. And going back to the argument about Ben Bradley, I'm worried I'm going to say the wrong one now. You said it.
It's hard, isn't it? It is hard.
Yeah, well, I mean, it wasn't until you said it, and now I didn't really think about it. But I think the problem with the government has got here is no matter what any Tory MP says on Twitter or says to school or says to a constituent in a letter, I think the narrative has been set, and the only way to kind of redeem themselves now is to U-turn on this free school meal policy. And even if they do that, I feel like enough damage has been done. So I keep, whenever I go on Twitter, I see some Tory MP saying, "Oh, it's all been misrepresented. This is the real truth." And it's like, I mean, there might be some caveats relating to the vote on Wednesday, but I mean, the narrative is there now, and I just don't think, no matter what any government minister says, I mean, I don't know if anyone saw Andrew Meyer say, Brandon Lewis went on and was like really struggling to defend it, and I just feel like he is wasting his breath, and I feel like he knows he's wasting his breath, because it's like no one's going to listen now, because it's in people's heads, and the only way to redeem themselves a little bit is to U-turn, and if they do, it'll be another of many U-turns from the summer.
As Boris Johnson, to paraphrase someone else, or maybe the Bojo is not returning. Maybe this is his new permanent path.
Wow.
That was a good joke, Ollie. You don't need to wow it. Now, so let's move for Boris Johnson. Someone lead with the opposition, Marcus Rashford. We've seen in his organisation, he's been trying to organise a network of community support instead of government support. I mean, what do you guys think about his efforts? Josh, I'll come to you.
Well, I must say I've been a fan of football for many years, but not Manchester United. But in the past, I would definitely say that there was always like this opinion in my head where like a lot of footballers would be disconnected because a lot in the Premier League have a lot of very high salaries. But I think the efforts of Marcus Rashford, particularly in this, has really shown to me a lot of character on his part, in that he shows the understanding of so many children across the country, which I think he also was in that position himself when he was younger. And the effort that he's made in providing free school meals to children, again, I said, really shows a good start to his character, and shows that he cares more about children in general than our own Prime Minister. But I'm just shocked that we have to say that. But Marcus Rashford, I have to say, full props to what he's doing. He's doing an amazing job.
Yeah. Well, I guess final question before we leave this segment and start talking about commentary in Tier 2. Marcus Rashford, you can't play football forever. Should Marcus Rashford think about turning his hand to politics? No, I'll come to you.
Oh, wow. Marcus Rashford in politics, maybe. I think it's been really impressive to see what he's done. And have you seen on his Twitter, all these different charities and different organisations have said that they'll make sure they're providing adequate food to make sure children are fed. Now, I love charity as much as the next person. I worked in a charity shop for many years, but at some point the state has to step in. You can't simply rely on charity by itself. It's Clement Attlee who talked about that if someone wants to be patriotic, it should be through paying their taxes and not simply giving money to charity alone. alone. So as I say, charity is brilliant, and it's great that he's come up with this campaign and promoted all these organisations. But the state has to step in at some point as well, especially when it's most vulnerable. We're not asking for children to be fed the sort of meals that you get at the Savoy or Dorchester hotels. It's just adequate food to make sure that they don't starve. And to think that that's a radical idea, in a sense, does show sort of the state of society, and it's very depressing when you put it sort of that bluntly.
Yeah. And Imogen, I'll let you have the final word on this. Marcus Rashford for PM?
I'm not sure that I can really picture him as like a politician or getting involved in like party politics. I think he's too much of like a social justice campaigner and more of like a providing a different perspective on different things and providing like a fresh new like point of view on what he's experienced as a child. And I think that he's too much of a like social campaigner to be getting involved in party politics and like all the nitty-gritty stuff of it.
Oh, of course. No. Question for PM.
Well, who knows? If Boris has fewer blooders like this, there might be an opening. So, our final story of today. Coventry is now officially in a Tier 2 lockdown. Wales is in a circuit breaker lockdown, and we're seeing the turning out of non-essential items being sold there. And the government is considering plans for a new Tier 4 in the latest update to their patchwork coronavirus plans. Imogen, you're someone who I know I keep coming back to you, but you're currently the only person I know currently living in Coventry. So what's it like? How's being in Tier 2 affected life on campus?
Well, it's just a bit confusing, really. Like, I'm not even sure. Like, so obviously the university said, oh, this won't affect like teaching and learning. It's all fine because that's of course like education. But there hasn't really been much going on in terms of what kind of socializing we can do and what kind of events we can go to and like how we can still get involved in stuff going on campus in like a rule complying way. And I'm still like really unsure on what the message is. And I think that definitely like there needs to be some like clarification on that issue, because obviously it's been like a few days we've been in here, but I haven't seen many changes just in general in terms of ever since going into this Tier 2. And I think that there definitely needs to, either from the SU or from the uni, definitely more clarification in terms of like actual socialising and the extent to which we can do it. Seeing as like the university is literally split like down the middle. Some of us are in Coventry, some of us are in Warwickshire, and there needs to be some like clarification in terms of actual socialising and not just in terms of education.
Yeah. I mean, so what is it? So university, what have they actually told you? And I got a notification from them. I didn't actually read it. I did get the notification. What have they actually told you so far?
Yeah, that's it. Just a notification saying that education is, and like teaching and seminars and all that is just staying the same. That's literally it. From the actual university, that's it.
Yeah. Has anyone here had an in-person seminar since we all moved online, or we all been? Oh, Ollie, what's it been like in this new Tier 2 system over there?
It's very weird because you're in a seminar and everyone has a mask on, and I don't feel like we recognised how important body language was until we're all sat, 2 meters apart, often like behind each other as well. Because I know in one of my seminars is kind of lecture theatre, so it's like you're sat, in front of people and you're not even looking at them, and it's bad enough, not being able to gauge someone's body language and when you can like butt in and say something and kind of challenge them. But it's just impossible, and I feel like the quality of seminars is just far worse because one, the mask and the hearing and the practical problem with that, but also like I don't think we recognise how much of a barrier that is, a mask is to a good conversation.
Yeah, I guess that raises the question then. With Coventry going to Tier 2 lockdown, would it not be safer now to the university to say, we tried our best, it's not working out, let's move online? Josh, as someone who's been in lockdown twice now, what do you feel about it?
See, this is the thing. I really am one of those people that really dislikes doing online learning. I just don't do well at all with it. So in-person seminars has been the way I've been trying to do my things and doing my modules, because that's the way that I learn best. I have to learn best when I'm actually physically there and talking to people where I can actually see them instead of looking at a screen at them, because there's like that disconnect. But I think even with that, with the fact that Coventry's entering Tier 2, the fact of the matter is, because we will have intermingling on campus between an area which is Tier 2, which has a higher risk of coronavirus, to then the Warwickshire region, county of Warwickshire in terms of Leamington Spa, Warwick Town, Kenilworth, the fact that they're all going to now mingle in this one campus space means that it can very easily become tier 2 in these towns as well. So I think there is a lot of caution that needs to be displayed by the university in this sense, and if the case is that online learning will prevent any further escalation of tiers in Coventry or in the county of Warwickshire, I think it does need to be taken into account, and online learning will need to be seriously considered as a sort of catch-all.
Yeah. Now, Noah, you very furiously shook your head when I asked that question.
I did shake my head at your suggestion. I've actually been really pleased with how the university have done in-person learning. I think they've done it the best that they can do. Obviously, it does feel strange, walking into a seminar wearing a mask and it almost being in like exam-style seating. You just feel like you've not revised enough for something to remember there is actually no exam. And obviously, the conversations are different. My in-person seminars, there's not much group talking. It's all done through the seminar tutor. But I think that has been done really well, actually, and I haven't found it too tricky to still engage, still say what I think, which surprisingly I like to say what I think, and then hear what other people have to say too. And I think the whole tier system, I think it is really worrying, and I think we should try as much as we can to keep education going throughout, whether it's schools, sixth form or universities. What we learned in the first lockdown is that education really is essential, and perhaps shutting the schools the way that we did was actually a really terrible idea. And I also think obviously every person that gets coronavirus, it's worrying when you've got it. But I think we also have to remember that we're seeing more cases because we are testing more. And so it's a real double-edged sword. Obviously, it's worrying, but it's because we are testing more. And we also need to remember that particularly for our generation at a university, we're far less likely to be affected by, either die from COVID or be affected by long COVID. So while it is concerning that the cases are going up, I think we have to remember our generation is both not as so much risk, and also it's because we are testing more.
Yeah. Well, we had another comment from Jacob who says, I suppose Coventry to finally answer the question. Leamington, Trump, Coventry. Jacob, as someone who lives, I know that you live in Coventry, so I want to say thank you for that admission. You are correct. You made the wrong choice. Jacob told me he lived in Canley. He lives 30 minutes away from Canley. I got to the Tesco. He was like, you can walk to my house. It was a half-hour walk away. That's not relevant. That's not what he's talking about today. But what that reminds me of, things can always get worse. And in that sense, the government has revealed that they're considering planning to introduce a new Tier 4 lockdown, which will see even more restrictions put in place. I want to ask, the Tier 1 to 3 system was introduced like a few weeks ago. Already we're seeing a new tier being added. Is the system working? Ollie?
I don't actually think that the tier system is getting to the root of the problem because, the R rate has slowed in recent days, but it's still well above 1 in every region of the UK. And I think I was looking at a study the other day, I think it was in The Independent, which said that when schools reopened, they were responsible for a 24% rise in the R number. Now, my own opinion is therefore, and also when you look at the data, by the end of August, things, despite the ETAP to Help Out scheme, things hadn't massively increased. It was only when, obviously, schools and universities went back that cases began to rise quite exponentially. But then at the same time, I think, as Noah says, like when schools closed before, that was really, really damaging. So it's like, I personally think that they're currently the biggest drivers behind it. But then at the same time, they're kind of the one thing that we should absolutely not close. So I feel like the government are between a rock and a hard place here, because I just think, like, what do you do? Because I feel like you can conclude now that education is driving cases up, but at the same time, except that you really, really don't want to kind of reverse that and be closing schools and universities. So I think what Wales have done with a circuit breaker is, it's successful at suppressing the virus for a period, but it's not a long-term strategy. So I feel like, in my opinion, just mass testing and quick test results all the way forward, but then at the same time, I feel like that is going to lead to, as Noah says, because we'll test even more people, we'll get even more cases. So I really don't know what the solution is here. So I'm glad I'm not the one that's having to make the decisions. But I would say Wales covering bookshelves in supermarkets is definitely not getting to the nub of the issue.
Well, thank you so much for that transition, Oliver, because that's exactly what I want to talk about. Wales is in the middle of a circuit breaker, fire breaker lockdown. And one thing we've seen, a rule introduced last week that said you can no longer sell non-essential items in stores. This ranged from things like books to things that, arguably, in my opinion, would be essential, like period pads. What do we think about the government saying, actually, you know what, in a lockdown crisis, you can't sell, you're going to limit what you can sell? Imogen, I'll come to you.
It's a bit confusing. I must like I don't know much about this issue, but I definitely think that it's a sticky situation, and yeah, I think I might have to go to someone else because it is a very difficult situation, and I'm not entirely that covered on it.
No, that's fair. It's very fair. That's most of what I said last year when I was an Insight. Josh, what do you think?
Well, firstly, the fact that they're saying that period pads aren't an essential item, that's a bit insane because, I mean, I'm not a woman, but I think I would count that as an essential item. And also the idea of saying you can't sell essential items. Okay, I can understand that. It's trying to tell the people, okay, you can only go out to get the essential items, and it gives that idea where it means it's now a case of just going out for essential reasons. But, I mean, the way we've seen it, where they've just put like a sort of plastic sheet over books or stuff like that. Surely I can just go up to the bookshelf, just tear open the plastic and just take my book. And I just don't know. It's like, and it's also a case of what do you deem as essential and non-essential? I mean, somebody would say this one item is essential. Someone else would say it's non-essential. I think there's a lot of cases where people are going to be in uproar about the case of what is and what isn't essential.
Well, I mean, I think Mel's made it pretty clear. Vodka is essential, and everything else is not.
I didn't see that photo. I was thinking, well, we need some way to pass the time.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that someone tearing down the sheets and just taking whatever they want. Well, we did see an example of that. An anti-lockdown protester went to a Tesco, tore the sheeting off, and just scarpered with what they received. Do we think that Wales' the new firebreaker lockdown is just encouraging people to break the rules rather than enforcing them? No, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I think that any public will you had during the first lockdown has well and truly gone away. And let's call a circuit breaker for what it is. It is another lockdown in all but name. I think governments are realising that people don't want another lockdown, so they're just changing the particular semantics that they're trying to use. As for what's happening in supermarkets, I think again it really shows the power of social media. People sharing videos like that person of the people tearing down the plastic sheets. And as Joss was saying, it is really completely subjective. If people were children, I think children's clothes were behind those sheets. Clothing in general may have been, and the one I personally was most worried about was the books. People weren't able to buy books. I think that is really damaging for sort of literary freedom and exploration. Economically, it will only help someone like Amazon and Jeff Bezos, because they'll buy the book they want. They'll just simply buy it online, and I just think it is really damaging for censorship, and also just completely subjective about what's essential to me or what isn't essential to me. I don't remember this happening in supermarkets during the first lockdown, so I don't know why the Welsh government think it's acceptable to happen now. And as I say, they're trying to ensure public will, they weren't. And my final point, I agree with Ollie where he was saying about how this circuit breaker is no long-term solution. What do they expect to happen after the 14 days? They're just going to extend it again and again. It just isn't acceptable, socially, for our mental health, economically, to keep going into these lockdowns when cases start to rise. It's not a long-term solution by any stretch.
You've brought us up to the final point then. There's been a recent report released advocating for a new system of on-off lockdown. So 2 weeks in lockdown, 2 weeks out, 2 weeks in lockdown, 2 weeks out. Immediate negative responses from the panel, which is, I love it. I love it when you can just immediately, that's one great thing about doing a video of a live stream. Like if it was just not over a radio show, because on radio, I'd have to wait for you to say something, everyone to know you hate what I'm saying. Now you can immediately shake your heads. That's fantastic. So does anyone want to share exactly why they hate this so much?
It makes no sense. I mean, like,
Yes.
Ollie
It's not a
brought up,
long-term solution.
Ollie just brought up, it's just the case of, okay, 2 weeks lockdown, great. Okay, the R rate will go down those 2 weeks, but it'll just go straight back up again once everyone's socializing again because they want to get outside again.
Yeah. So then, how do we get out of this cycle? Is what we seem to be trapped in a cycle of either locking down and having massive restrictions. How do we get free?
Just gotta hope those vaccines work, don't we?
Yeah, literally what's going on right now, and just quicker testing.
Yeah, I was just about to say like quicker testing, and I don't know if anyone's seen this idea that's floating around of that if you like a test at home, but you can also like get the results. I mean, we were talking about it last week, but like later that day or the next day, I just think it speeds up the process whereby, and then you can feel confident if you go outside, knowing that someone else has also taken a test, say earlier that day or the day before, and knowing they also haven't got it. So I feel like that would just kind of reduce the scope to worry. I mean, I think mass testing is kind of like the only kind of way forward, even if it does kind of exacerbate panic when we see high numbers.
Yeah. Well, Hannah, I want to say you've been absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful having you on the show today. You've all been absolutely brilliant. I want to thank you all for coming on. Josh, Ollie, Imogen, Noah, it's been great having you here. I'm gonna upload myself now. So thank you everyone for watching. I just want to say one last thing three last things before we go. Thing number one, because I keep plugging it. It's Raw 50 today, starting at 1 o'clock. Less than 6 minutes to go, so please do tune in. It's going to be a fantastic 3 days of content. You won't want to miss this. And also, one last thing I want to say is that Raw is having a US election special on the night of the US election and in the morning afterwards. If you want to take part, there are still spaces available. I've put a link in the description of this this live stream. So if you want to find out more, you want to get involved, click on the links, message me, leave a comment, and I will be happy to get back to you and explain anything you need to know. But thank you everyone for watching today. It's an absolutely wonderful show. I hope you have a good week.